She probably left him her garden gnome collection, Bryce chuckled, loud enough for the entire room to hear. Laughter rippled across the row of smug faces, 3 adult children in designer clothes, all too busy smirking to notice the lawyer's glance. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I just kept my hand folded on my knee, the same way I used to when Margaret had bad days, when she'd stare at the fridge trying to remember where the butter was, or when her son showed up once a year and called it love. Now here I was, corner of the room, chair with a wobbly leg, flanked by shelves of dusty law books and a mahogany clock that ticked too loud. My role, as far as they were concerned, was background furniture, an antique she accidentally married. Honestly, Dana, eldest, loudest, and most entitled, tossed her Gucci bag on the table. If I have to split the lake house with him, I'm selling my half. I mean, what's he even going to do with it? Fish? She wrinkled her nose like the word itself offended her. He'll probably turn it into a workshop for birdhouses or something tragic, Bryce added. Maybe she left him the Volvo, their sister April snorted. You know, so he can drive his feelings to therapy. The lawyer, Mr. Krantz, cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses in that way lawyers do when they're about to watch a demolition. If we're all ready, he began, but they weren't listening. Bryce was still scrolling through his phone, probably looking up the market value of the condo in Aspen. Dana was checking her teeth in a compact mirror. April was whispering something cruel behind her hand. You'd think after 23 years of birthday parties, Thanksgivings, and emergency room visits, I'd earned at least a nod, a glance, hell, even a sarcastic thanks. But I'd learned something years ago. The more helpful you are in this family, the faster they forget you exist. I was Mom's second mistake, as Bryce once called me in the driveway. Said it while holding a wine cooler and asking if I could move my car. So I sat there, silent. Like always. Tick, tock. The room smelled like old paper, leather, and Chanel perfume. A storm of entitlement brewing in soft cashmere and Botox. And still, I stayed silent. Not out of weakness, but because I already knew what was coming. Because 15 years ago, Margaret had handed me a folder. No big speech, no dramatic music, just her shaking hands, a trembling voice, and a whispered, in case they forget who stood beside me. I never opened it, didn't need to. I trusted her, more than I trusted anything else in this world, and if she wanted me to wait for this moment, I'd wait. So I did. Through the dementia, through the decline, through the pitying looks from neighbors and the condescension from her adult children who never stayed longer than brunch. And now they all sat like vultures in high heels and tailored suits, laughing about casserole and garages, thinking they were about to collect what they never earned. But here's the part they'll never understand. Margaret didn't rewrite the will to punish them. She rewrote it because I was the one who stayed, the one who held her when she forgot her own name but still remembered mine. And you know what? If you've made it this far, do me one small favor. Tap that follow button. More than 97% of folks listen without subscribing, and frankly, it's the only thing that keeps this kind of story alive. It means a lot to our team. Back in that office, Mr. Krantz leaned forward and opened the envelope with a practiced motion. The air shifted, paper rustled. Bryce finally looked up. Dana stopped checking her lipstick. April's whisper died mid-sentence. The lawyer cleared his throat again, but this time, he wasn't just starting the will, he was starting the avalanche. 15 years earlier, the fire crackled like a slow-burning fuse, just loud enough to fill the silence Margaret had let sit too long. She stared into it, swirling the brandy in her glass like she was watching something melt. We didn't usually sit in silence. She liked to narrate memories, laugh at old gossip, remind me how I always undercooked the roast. But tonight, she was silent. Until she wasn't. I don't think they'd even notice if I vanished, she said without turning. I didn't say anything at first. I'd learned the hard way not to argue with sadness in its raw form. You let it talk, let it bleed. They send flowers for Christmas, generic cards. I bet Dana has her assistant write mine. Bryce signs his with a different pen like it's an autograph. And April? Well, she's too busy playing Instagram therapist to remember my birthday was in June, not July. She turned to me then, finally. Her face was soft, not angry, just tired in a way only disappointment can carve. You've been the one here every day, Richard. I blinked. Well, I live here, I said with a nervous smile. She didn't laugh. You know what I mean. I set my cup down. They're still your kids. They were, she said, quick and sharp. But somewhere along the line, they stopped being mine and started being people I had to impress. Margaret, she waved it off. No, I'm not trying to rant. I've been thinking. When I go, and I will, Richard, let's not play coy. I want it to be clean, simple, no courtroom brawls, no calls from their third lawyer of the week. She reached under the end table and pulled out a manila folder, something I'd never seen before. She handed it to me. Inside, spreadsheets, copies of deeds, bank statements, and a handwritten letter sealed with red wax, her initials in the middle. What is this? The rest of the plan. I flipped through. She had already spoken to a notary, had shifted the beach house to a trust in both our names. The stocks? Transferred gradually over the past 5 years, all above board. And the main house? Deeded over in stages, marked as property of survivorship. I thought we'd do this together, she added softly. But I started early. I didn't want to leave you to clean up their tantrums. I looked up. They're your kids, Margaret. This will destroy them. Her eyes didn't waver. Then they should have acted like it. She said it without venom. No dramatics, no tears, just a plain truth she'd been carrying for too long. I remember my father saying, wills don't divide property, they divide families. He was right, so I figured we'd divide everything while we're still here, together, with intent. I leaned back in my chair. You're asking me to outlive them. She smiled sadly. No, I'm asking you to outlast them. We sat in silence again. The fire kept cracking. Somewhere down the hall, the old dog snored in his bed, unaware that this quiet night would one day become a turning point. I didn't agree right away. I pushed the folder back toward her, told her I wasn't interested in playing gatekeeper, told her I didn't want the blame, but she pushed it right back. You already carry the weight, Richard. You just don't get the title. Eventually I signed. Not for the property, not for the beach house or stocks or the Volvo. I signed because she asked me to, and because deep down I knew she was right. One day they'd come not with grief, but with calculators and plastic smiles, and I'd need more than polite patience to face them. I'd need proof. She reached over, took my hand and whispered, You stayed when my memory left. This is just me remembering who you were before I forget again. We kissed, soft and brief, and that night, while the fire died down to glowing embers, I tucked the folder into the back of the old liquor cabinet behind a dusty bottle of apricot schnapps no one ever drank. I didn't think about it again, not until the lawyer opened the first envelope. Bryce strutted in first, wearing loafers that probably cost more than my monthly pension check, tapping away on his phone like he was too busy closing some imaginary deal to notice where he was. His sunglasses stayed on for a full 30 seconds indoors, long enough for Dana to sigh loudly and mutter, You're not in Miami anymore, Bryce. She came in next, all perfume and sharp angles, designer grief stitched into a perfectly black wrap dress that showed just enough shoulder to imply mourning and wealth could coexist. Behind her was April, the youngest, who wore white, because Mom would have wanted light, not darkness, she'd said when I opened the door. She hugged me the way you hug a coat rack, polite, hollow, gone in a second. Is the Porsche part of the haul, or is that considered sentimental property? Bryce asked, grinning as he threw himself into the chair opposite me. Because I've always had my eye on that sweet old girl. Silver with the tan leather interior, right? April tossed her clutch onto the table, pretending not to hear him. I want the art, she said. The watercolor by the stairs isn't original. People don't even realize that. Dana crossed her legs and snapped open her water bottle. I'll deal with the lake house. I can renovate, flip it, or just use it to get out of LA. I need a break from the fake. Bryce laughed. Irony just died and no one noticed. They weren't grieving. They were circling, like sharks in pearls and Rolexes. I watched them pass the time by taking inventory of a life they had only dipped into when convenient. Not one of them mentioned Margaret, not her laugh, not her stubborn crossword addiction, not the humming she did when washing dishes, even when she forgot the lyrics. They only talked square footage, resale, portfolio liquidation. To them, Mom's death was a liquidity event. The lawyer entered precisely at 11. Mr. Krantz, same as ever, meticulous, grave, and professionally dull. But when he saw me, he walked straight over and shook my hand. Richard, he said, nodding, thank you for coming. Margaret left everything well prepared. Bryce raised an eyebrow. She left him something? Other than the toaster, April added. I mean, maybe a thank you note, that'd be classy. Dana checked her watch. Let's just get through this, please. I've got a flight at 5. Krantz moved with quiet efficiency. 3 thick folders, 1 per child, 1 envelope, thinner, for me, 1 sealed letter, wax stamped, laid on the table beside the pitcher of water. He sat, adjusted his glasses. Thank you for being here today, he began. As Margaret's estate executor, I'm here to formally read and distribute the instructions per her will and trust, last updated 6 years ago and reaffirmed in a separate document 2 months prior to her passing. Dana leaned back, visibly annoyed. We all know how this works. Let's skip the ceremony. She was very specific, Krantz said, unshaken. The reading must be done in person, aloud, and in full. Bryce scoffed, dramatic to the bitter end. April flipped open her folder and started scanning. Her smile wavered just slightly. Krantz raised a hand. Please wait. We'll go in order. They reluctantly closed the folders like kids pretending they weren't peeking at presents before Christmas. And then, he began. First with the preamble. A letter from Margaret, typed, notarized, simple. I was not a perfect mother, it read, but I hoped my children would grow into people who showed up, not only when money was involved. A pause. April's lips thinned. I leave the following gifts not in malice but in honesty. Bryce sat up straighter. To my son Bryce, who called me useless at my own birthday dinner when I forgot the wine he requested, you receive $1. The silence was instant. Krantz didn't even look up. April blinked. Dana stared at her brother. To my daughter Dana, who told the nurse I was no longer a real person when I missed an appointment, $1. Dana made a sound like a dry cough but didn't speak. To my youngest, April, who filmed herself crying outside the hospice wing but never came inside, $1. April's cheeks flushed. I hope you all use the money wisely. Bryce finally broke the silence. This isn't funny. No, Krantz replied. It's legally binding. The air, moments ago smug and perfumed, now smelled like stale coffee and panic. The storm wasn't coming. It had arrived, and the first cracks were showing in their perfectly curated smiles. Krantz read each sentence with that same even tone lawyers are trained to use, the kind that makes every word hit harder because there's no emotion to soften it, just clean precision, like a surgeon with a scalpel. To the one who called me useless, he paused. The words landed like a slap in an empty church. Bryce's smirk faltered. His thumb froze mid-scroll on his phone. You get $1. Krantz didn't look up, didn't blink. He simply reached into the folder, removed a crisp envelope, and slid it across the polished table. It was light, flat, almost insulting in its smallness. Bryce didn't touch it. He just stared at it like it might be a prank. A soft snort came from April, trying to mask her nerves as a laugh. You're kidding, she said, too brightly. That's, what, symbolic or something? Krantz ignored her and turned the page. To the one who said I was a burden. Another pause. All eyes shifted to Dana. The eldest, always in control, suddenly found herself rearranging her bracelet. You get $1. Dana's face didn't move for a full 3 seconds. Then she gave a dry, controlled chuckle. Cute, very poetic, mother. But her voice cracked halfway through poetic. Krantz continued, steady as ever. To the one who treated my illness like an inconvenience, who came for holidays but not for me, you also receive $1. April laughed, this time louder, but no one joined in. Oh, come on. Is this a performance piece? Did she hire a ghostwriter? The lawyer stopped reading, closed the document, and looked up at them for the first time. Miss Jensen, these are Margaret's words, signed, dated, and witnessed. I assure you, this is no performance. Silence, the kind that fills every crack in a room until even breathing feels intrusive. Bryce leaned forward, voice low, dangerous. She wasn't of sound mind. Everyone knows that. You can't just... Actually, Krantz interrupted, her medical capacity was evaluated multiple times. I have those documents as well. She was lucid and deliberate in every revision. I could feel their eyes turning toward me, one by one, not curious, accusing. Bryce's glare burned first. You think this is funny? I shook my head. No. Dana leaned in. You knew. You must have known. She didn't just wake up one day and write this. She didn't wake up one day and get forgotten either, I said quietly. April rolled her eyes. Oh, spare us the saint routine. You think taking care of her gives you moral high ground? You think that's what this is about? Krantz cleared his throat before I could answer. There's more. Of course there was. Margaret always saved the best for last. He unfolded the next page. To those who mocked my husband for being kind instead of ambitious, and who measured love in net worth, you received the reminder that kindness is currency, and you are bankrupt. Bryce shot up from his chair, palms flat on the table. This is a setup. Krantz didn't react. He simply gestured toward the remaining sealed envelope on the table. And to the man who held my hand when I forgot my own name, his eyes flicked to me. She has a final letter. The siblings erupted. This is manipulation, Dana snapped. You filled her head with guilt. You think you can just take everything? Bryce shouted. You, a guy who married up and played nurse for a paycheck? Paycheck? I said softly. You never saw the bills, did you? April slammed her palm down. You had access to her accounts. You probably talked her into it when she was doped up on medication. She was sharper than any of you when she signed those papers, I replied. You just didn't bother to notice. Krantz placed a calm hand on the table. Please, he said, let's maintain some dignity. Mrs. Jensen left clear records, every transfer, every signature witnessed by independent counsel. No one spoke. Bryce finally sat back down, shaking his head. I don't believe this. You don't have to, Krantz said simply. The law does. April's face twisted with disbelief. She'd never cut us out like this. Never. She already did, I said. They didn't respond. They just stared at the 3 $1 bills on the table, thin, crisp, and louder than any insult they'd ever thrown my way. Those dollars weren't money. They were truth. And no matter how much they tried, they couldn't erase it. Krantz set the pages down with slow precision, then reached for the final envelope, thicker, heavier, sealed in dark blue wax. The initials MJ were etched clean across the front. He didn't speak right away, just placed it in front of him like it was something sacred. Then he looked at me. Richard, he said quietly, this one's for you. I didn't move, not because I was nervous, but because I already knew. Krantz opened the seal with a silver letter opener and unfolded a single sheet of paper. Margaret's handwriting, flowing, careful, still so her. For a second, it felt like she was back in the room, like she'd never left, like she was just sitting beside me again, holding her mug too close to the edge of the table, humming something half-remembered. Then Krantz began to read. To the man who held my hand when I forgot my own name, who wiped my chin when I was too proud to ask, who knew me even when I didn't. You, Richard, were not my second chance. You were my first real piece. The words hit harder than I expected. No flourish, no grand poetry, just her voice on paper, reaching through time like a whisper that refused to fade. You are the only one I trust to carry this home forward. You always told me they were still my kids. I wish they'd remembered that when I needed more than polite texts and vacation selfies. I wish they'd stayed, but they didn't. You did. Krantz paused. The room was silent, for once, truly silent. Then he continued. To you, I leave everything, every asset, every account, every deed and key, not out of spite, but out of gratitude, because you didn't wait until I was gone to show up. You showed up every day. Krantz folded the letter, placed it beside me, and turned to the stack of documents in his briefcase. One by one, he began laying them out. Updated titles, bank ownership transfers, healthcare proxy filings, investment portfolios, real estate trusts. The table, once crowded with manicured hands and whispered entitlement, was now covered in black and white proof that Margaret had been planning this for a long, long time. Bryce was the first to snap. This is a setup. This is bull. She was sick. She had no idea what she was doing. Dana joined in, rising from her chair. This isn't just unethical, it's criminal. He manipulated her. Look at him. He's sitting there like a vulture. Save it, I said, finally speaking. You weren't there. April stood too. You're not even blood. You were just some guy who hung around until she got too weak to fight back. She wasn't weak, I said quietly. You just weren't there to see her strength. Krantz slid a slim folder across the table. All documents were signed 6 years ago while Mrs. Jensen was of full mental capacity. They were reviewed by a third-party attorney and witnessed by 2 independent professionals. Here are the certifications and timestamps. Bryce grabbed the folder and scanned the first few pages like he was searching for an error that would magically undo reality. His mouth moved, but no words came out. Dana leaned against the wall, arms crossed, jaw clenched so tight it looked like it hurt. April finally spoke again, this time in a whisper. She knew we'd be angry. She counted on it, Krantz replied calmly, and prepared accordingly. They couldn't process it, not really. These were people used to getting their way, used to papering over disappointment with plane tickets and spa weekends. But this was real, irrefutable, not an emotional slight, a legal fact. Margaret had chosen me, not for revenge, but for recognition. Bryce paced the room now, muttering to himself like a broker watching the stock market crash. There's no way this holds up. No way. We'll fight it. I've got a guy. There's precedent. You're welcome to pursue a challenge, Krantz said, unfazed. But I should warn you, it won't go far. Every step was documented, every asset transfer properly filed, and your mother, unlike many clients, was exceptionally clear about her intent. Dana snapped, "Oh, so now she's some mastermind?" "No," I said, standing slowly. "She just finally stopped waiting for you to act like family." The room froze. The air shifted, less like oxygen, more like pressure, like something had deflated or burst. No one argued, no one moved. They'd spent years waiting for a payday, but what they got instead was a letter they couldn't erase, documents they couldn't burn, and a truth they couldn't twist. They wanted power, but they showed up too late. They moved fast, like sharks smelling blood. But this time, the blood was theirs. Within 48 hours, Dana had contacted a high-powered estate attorney out of Chicago. "Specialist in reversals," she bragged on a call I wasn't meant to overhear. "He's done this before. Elder coercion, undue influence, that kind of thing." She said it like she was ordering room service. Bryce followed up with a call to a judge he used to golf with, casually mentioned it over dinner with his girlfriend. April, of course, posted cryptic Instagram stories about betrayal and step-parents stealing legacies, using a sad filter and tagging nobody yet everybody. I stayed silent, as usual, let them punch the air until they tired themselves out. But the thing about Margaret was, even in decline, she was deliberate, strategic. They'd always underestimated her, saw her as soft, sentimental, easy to manipulate. But they forgot one key thing. She married a man who read every line of a contract, and she became the kind of woman who stopped trusting signatures written in crayon. Within days, Krantz received a formal inquiry from their legal team. I wasn't CC'd, but I saw the folder when I came in for a check-in. Heavy paper, official letterhead, posturing in ink. He handed it to me like he was showing me a bad painting. "They're going to fight it," he said flatly. I just nodded. "Of course they are." The next week was a slow-motion unraveling. Emails flew. Depositions were proposed. Dana posted a photo of herself with their new lawyer, Reed Thomas Simmons, Esquo, smiling like they'd already won. His face screamed billable hours. Bryce dropped by uninvited, claiming he needed to walk the property before someone sells it out from under us. I told him if he wanted to walk it, he could mow it while he was at it. Then, 2 weeks later, Krantz invited all parties to a mediation meeting. Neutral location, standard procedure. The temperature was tense, and the coffee was bad. Simmons did most of the talking. "We're prepared to present a compelling case for undue influence. Our clients were excluded from the estate under suspicious circumstances," Krantz interrupted, calm but surgical. "Suspicious in your opinion, not in fact." Simmons smirked. "We believe Mrs. Jensen was not of sound mind at the time these documents were amended." That's when Krantz dropped the file, not metaphorically, physically, a beige folder the thickness of a small encyclopedia. He let it land on the table with a thunk. Inside, everything. Cognitive assessments dated 6 years ago and updated annually until 6 months before her death, signed by 3 different specialists. One neuropsychologist had even handwritten a note. "Patient shows exceptional memory and decision-making clarity for her age." There were emails, letters, recordings, one particularly brutal one, a voicemail Dana had left her mother during a missed Christmas dinner. "I'm not your nurse. Stop guilting me." Margaret had saved it, not for revenge, for proof. Simmons flipped through each page, slower and slower, his confident posture deflated by degrees. This is comprehensive," he finally muttered. "Correct," Krantz said, "and we have digital timestamps for every asset transfer, IP logs, witness testimonies. Margaret made sure this wasn't just legal, it was bulletproof." Simmons leaned back. "Give me a moment." He stepped out of the room to take a call. I watched Dana's fingers tremble as she sipped from her water bottle like it might contain answers. Bryce's leg bounced so hard the table shook. April was already scrolling through her phone, crafting her next victim narrative. 10 minutes later, Simmons returned. His face had shifted. Gone was the predator. What came back was a man doing damage control. He sat, cleared his throat, and looked at them, not at me. "She knew what she was doing." Dana blinked. "Excuse me?" "Your mother," Simmons said carefully, "was competent, prepared, and very, very clear." April whispered, "But she was sick." "Not then," Simmons said. "Not legally, not medically, not even emotionally. I could drag this out, but you won't win. All you'll do is waste time and money." Bryce stood up and knocked over his chair. "She abandoned us." "No," I said. "She remembered who showed up." They glared at me, but there was nothing left to throw. Simmons closed the folder. "My professional recommendation? Let it go. Walk away with your dignity. If not for your reputation, then at least for your mother's memory. Dana looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. She's not the woman I thought she was. No, I said, she never was. You just never asked. No threats, no screaming, just cold, hard law laid out like steel bars in a prison they built for themselves. They wanted a fight, but Margaret had already won. The old church smelled like wax and pine and worn hymnals that had absorbed generations of regret. Same cracked stained glass above the altar, same warped floorboards near the pews where Margaret used to sit, third row, left side, always with a tissue folded twice in her coat pocket. I hadn't been back since the funeral. The flowers were gone now, and the pity stares had faded. But when I called and asked if Pastor Jim had time for coffee, he told me to come by alone. We should talk, he said. There's something you need to see. He met me at the side door, still wearing his threadbare cardigan with a coffee stain from Easter service 2 years ago. You look thinner, he said. Legal diets are great for the waistline, I replied. He didn't smile, just motioned me toward the small office behind the pulpit. Margaret used to call it the thinking room, said it smelled like old prayers and burnt coffee. She wasn't wrong. Pastor Jim sat behind his desk and reached into the bottom drawer, pulled out a sealed envelope, plain, except for a blue ink scribble across the front. For Richard, only after. She gave this to me 6 months before she passed, he said. Told me you'd know when it was time to read it. I stared at the envelope, didn't touch it. She knew they'd come for blood, he continued, softer now. She knew how they'd twist it, how they'd try to erase the years you gave her. I finally took the letter. It was heavier than it looked, not in paper, but in meaning. I think she left it for you, he added, because some truths are too quiet to survive lawyers. I unfolded the paper, hands trembling more than I wanted to admit. Her handwriting was there again, still strong, still hers. I sat down and read. Richard, if you're holding this, then the chaos has already started. I'm sorry for that. I tried to make it clean, tried to leave the world the way you kept our home, swept, orderly, quiet. But they were never quiet, were they? Always noise, always schedules and calendars and dinners where I wasn't allowed to be tired. I kept waiting for them to come back, not for the will or the assets, but for me. They didn't. Not when I forgot how to hold a fork, not when I cried because I couldn't open the orange juice, not when I asked the same question 3 times in 5 minutes. You were the one who brought me soup, who sat through the silences, who never corrected me when I called the dog the wrong name. You made me feel like I still mattered, even when I didn't remember why. They only remembered me when it was convenient. You remembered me when I was fading. That's why I left it to you, not to punish them, but because this life, our life, was real. You gave me peace. Now I hope I've given you enough to make yours. Love, M. I didn't cry in the office. That came later. I walked out into the parking lot, letter still in my hand, and sat in the driver's seat of the old Volvo she used to call Bessie. And then it hit me. Not the victory, not the money, not the final checkmate I never wanted to play. Grief. Real, quiet, undramatic grief. The kind that doesn't need wailing or slamming fists. Just a man in an empty car, reading the last words of the only person who ever really saw him. I broke down, forehead on the steering wheel, hands trembling, chest hollow. Not because she was gone, but because she'd understood. Every thankless day, every spoon-fed meal, every quiet evening pretending to watch TV while watching her vanish instead. She saw it. And even now, in death, she remembered to tell me, you mattered. I didn't want to win. I just wanted someone to remember that I stayed. And she did. It didn't take long for the rot to spread. Within 3 weeks of the will reading, their group chats went dark. The curated Instagram photos stopped. The siblings' first captions disappeared. Family dinners were canceled, first politely, then with venom. Dana blocked Bryce. April left the family WhatsApp group after calling them both entitled leeches in a message that went on for 4 paragraphs and included 2 emojis that were wildly inappropriate for the context. I didn't have to watch it happen. The news made its way to me in fragments, through the local gossip chain, Margaret's old bridge partner, and one unfortunate barista who heard Dana arguing with her bank on speakerphone. The cracks were spreading in every direction. Bryce was the first to bleed. Turns out, he'd already spent most of what he thought was his future inheritance, borrowed against it, in fact. 2 years ago, he'd taken out a private loan from some quiet investor to buy a second property outside Palm Springs, signed the paperwork confidently, counting on a seven-figure safety net once Margaret passed. His plan? Flip it, pay off the note, and profit. Except now the note was due, and the safety net was a single-dollar bill folded neatly in an envelope. He tried to refinance, but his debt-to-income ratio was trash, and when the investor threatened legal action, he was forced to sell the property at a loss. Word is, he moved into a rental half the size and hasn't answered a call from Dana since. Dana didn't fare much better. She had promised a certain creditor, her ex-husband's lawyer of all people, that she'd be able to repay him within 30 days of the will execution. He'd extended her deadline on the good faith that Margaret Jensen's estate was substantial. When the court documents hit and showed her inheritance, $1, he didn't laugh. He sued, publicly. The story even made it into a regional finance blog under the title, "The $1 Heiress: How an Assumed Inheritance Triggered a Lawsuit." April tried to keep her head down, but she couldn't help herself. She posted a long Instagram caption beneath a sunset photo. "Sometimes the ones we call family poison us and leave us bleeding while they pretend they're the victim." She didn't name names, but Dana commented a snake emoji. Bryce liked the comment. 2 days later, they unfollowed each other. Their fake unity, held together for decades by shared contempt and hollow holidays, crumbled without the prize they thought they were entitled to. Turns out, shared greed isn't much of a bond when there's nothing left to steal. I watched it all unfold from a distance. Never replied to April's half-hearted text. "Just checking in, hope you're doing okay." I knew it wasn't about me. It was about proximity to the estate. When it was gone to her, so was I. Margaret's lawyer, Krantz, called to update me one morning. They filed an informal objection through the probate clerk, cited vague emotional manipulation and spiritual disenfranchisement. "What does that even mean?" I asked. He chuckled. "Nothing. It was dismissed before the ink dried." At night, I'd sit on the back porch, mug in hand, the same way Margaret used to. The lake was still, the wind quiet, the house peaceful in a way it hadn't been in years. And across town, the cars were gone. Dana sold her Audi to pay legal fees. Bryce's second home sat gutted and cold on Zillow, marked down for a motivated seller. April started crowdfunding for a healing retreat in Arizona. They'd built their lives on the assumption that their mother's assets would cushion their every mistake. But the cushion was gone. And all that was left? Each other, which, as it turned out, was more curse than comfort. "You gave up on her first," Bryce allegedly said in a voicemail to Dana. "I was the only one who ever came around," she replied in a group message later screenshotted and sent to a friend of mine. "You poisoned her," April texted Dana one night after 3 glasses of Pinot. "Not with drugs, just with indifference." That was the last message any of them sent in that thread. 3 siblings, $3, and a silence that will last longer than any of them imagined. Margaret had warned them. She didn't write them out of her will. They walked out of her life, long before she put it in ink. The call came on a Tuesday. I remember because I was organizing the pantry, one of those small, quiet rituals that keeps your hands busy while your mind tries not to drift into old shadows. The phone rang, and for a moment, I thought it might be a telemarketer. I almost didn't answer, but it was Krantz. "Richard," he said gently, "there's one more item." I didn't ask what it was. Didn't need to. He said it had been placed in a private safe deposit box with specific instructions. She wanted it delivered after all matters of the estate were settled, not before. I didn't drive to the office right away. I sat with it, let it settle. Something about the timing told me it wasn't just an object. Margaret never did anything without purpose. If this came now, after the storm had passed, it meant she saved it for a reason. When I finally arrived, Krantz didn't speak much, just handed me a small velvet box and a plain white envelope. No wax seal, no initials, just my name in her familiar cursive, the ink slightly smudged like she'd hesitated before writing it. I opened the box first. Inside was her wedding ring, the original one, not the upgraded diamond she wore for a few years in the 90s when Dana convinced her she deserved better, but the original gold band, the one she married me with. Thin, simple, unpolished, and warm somehow, even after all this time. I sat down in the empty conference room, the box in one hand, the letter in the other. There was no ceremony, no audience, just me, a ticking wall clock, and the last unopened part of her voice. I unfolded the paper. "Richard, this is the ring I wore when I said yes. Not the one they like to show off, not the one I upgraded for appearances. The real one. I wore it when we argued in the grocery store about which brand of soup was better. I wore it when I forgot your birthday and cried about it in the bathtub. I wore it when I woke up in a hospital bed and saw your face before anything else. You were there. Not once, not occasionally. You were there always. And I know you'll want to give this back, or bury it, or pretend it doesn't matter. But I'm asking you, just this once, wear it. Wear it for me, then put it away. One day, you'll meet someone who earns it. Someone who reminds you that love doesn't always show up in the form of marriage. It shows up in soup, in silence, in staying. Give it to them. Love, M. I didn't cry this time. Maybe because I'd already spent those tears in the parking lot of the church. Or maybe because grief, once it's soaked through everything, doesn't leak anymore. It just sits there, like a weight in your chest, familiar, almost comforting. I held the ring between my fingers. It was smaller than I remembered, warmer too. I slid it onto my finger, just once. The fit was snug, natural, like it remembered me. I didn't keep it on for long, just a few minutes, just enough to feel her presence in the room. Then I stood, walked out to my car, drove home in silence, and opened the drawer beside the bed. Inside was a wooden box she'd once used to keep old keys and spare batteries. I placed the ring inside, closed the lid. No ceremony, no lock, just intention. She was gone. The battles were over. The vultures had flown away, empty-taloned and angrier than when they came. And all that was left, truly left, was this quiet artifact of a life that was lived fully, loved privately, and ended with the grace of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The house was silent when I returned, but it wasn't hollow. It was full of her, of us, and in that silence I found something rare, not peace, but strength, the kind you earn by staying. The dining room was small, warm, and filled with the clinking of modest cutlery and the kind of laughter that doesn't need to be loud to feel real. Candles flickered in thrift store holders. The roast wasn't perfect, and someone had burned the potatoes just a bit, but nobody cared. It wasn't about the food, it was about who was still at the table. My niece Ellie had insisted on hosting. She'd been the only one to call me after the dust settled, not to ask questions, not to fish for details, just to say, "You okay, Uncle Rich?" I was, or I was getting there. Around the table were faces I hadn't seen in too long. Jim from the church choir, who used to help Margaret carry hymnals when her hands shook. Lynn, our old neighbor from 2 doors down, who used to bring homemade peach cobbler on Thursdays just because. And Terrence, who had once fixed our leaky kitchen pipe at midnight during a storm and refused to take money for it. None of them were rich. None of them were particularly powerful, but they were here, and that mattered. I didn't tell them everything. I didn't need to. The headlines had done their rounds. Dana's lawsuit dismissal, Bryce's foreclosure, April's breakdown on social media. The tabloids had moved on. The world always does. But here, at this table, in this little rented house with mismatched chairs and too much garlic in the pasta, I finally felt something I hadn't felt in months. Solid. Ellie poured the last of the wine. "Uncle Rich," she said, nudging the bottle toward me, "say something before we toast. Margaret would have made you." I chuckled, took the glass and stood, slowly, stiff in the knees, but steady. I looked around, took a moment to actually see them, not as replacements, not as fill-ins for a family that had thrown me out like an old receipt, but as people who had stayed. And that, I realized, was all I'd ever wanted. "To those who stood by," I said, raising my glass, even when no one saw them. The clinks were soft, reverent. No shouts, no applause, just the sound of acknowledgement. Somewhere across town, I imagined the silence. Dana in her condo, now stripped of art and pride. A lawyer's bill growing like mold in the corner. Bryce, alone in a rented apartment with no balcony, watching his Porsche being loaded onto a flatbed. April, posting a filtered selfie in yoga gear, captioned with vague sadness and hoping someone would finally ask her, "Are you okay?" They'd gotten what they earned, which was nothing. And I hadn't taken revenge. I had simply stayed long enough to inherit the truth. I sat back down, the smile creeping onto my face like a long-forgotten reflex. Not a grin, not smug, just peace. Not for the fortune, though yes, it was all mine now. Not for the house, the stocks, the accounts, the ring, but because for the first time in a very long time someone saw me, not as the help, not as the second mistake, but as the man who stayed. And in the end, that was the loudest legacy of all. No fireworks, no courtroom battles, just a glass lifted in good company, and the knowledge that I didn't just win, I endured.